So these podiums are not made for short people. Thank you so much, Ida, for that presentation. And it just makes my blood boil to hear what's going on and how it's our tax dollars that are helping to pay for this. And I don't know about you all, but I am sickened by it, and I have had enough of it. And you'd think with the Trump administration, you know, people think, oh, well, there's all these liberal people want to do something that's against Trump. And all right, let's do something against Trump. We know it's a bipartisan policy that's been supporting Israel for decades. But let's just say it's Trump's fault now and go after Trump for what is happening. I don't know why we can't rebuild this peace movement, build a new big peace movement to demand that we stop giving our tax dollars to Israel. It's about time. And speaking of blood boiling, how do you feel when you see a busload of children in Yemen being blown up by the bombs of U.S. companies? How does that make you feel? And it didn't just happen on August 9th, it happened last night. 22 children killed in Yemen last night. As we were dancing and having a great time on our river cruise, 22 children killed in Gaza by U.S. bombs. Now, we in this room know it's U.S. bombs, but it was good to finally see CNN having a clip up saying, here are the places where Lockheed Martin bomb killed so many people, where Raytheon bomb killed so many people, where General Dynamics bomb killed so many people. It's important for the American people to understand that it is U.S. companies that are making a killing on killing, and that's a big reason why these wars continue. And I'm sick and tired of U.S. companies making all of this money by selling these weapons to one of the most repressive countries in the world, and that is Saudi Arabia. It is time that we cut our ties to Saudi Arabia, and while the Trump administration is cozying up even more than Obama did, and believe me, he did plenty, we have the Trump administration taking us down the war path with Yemen. Raise your hand if you're worried that a year from now we're going to be in a war with Yemen. All right, so look around. You see a lot of hands up. Are we going to let that happen? No. We are seeing it right before our eyes, and we have to do more. You look at Iran, and I wrote a book on Iran because I thought, we've got to understand how it is that there's an Islamic regime that we might not like. And how did it get there? It got there because of U.S. policies. It got there because the U.S. overthrew their democratically elected government in 1953. And here we are, worried about the Russians interfering with our elections. And what have we done? Not in Iran, but throughout the world. We overthrow other countries' governments. And in the case of Iran, a democratically elected government that wanted to do the right thing for the Iranian people, and that was nationalize Iran's oil. And because a British company was going to maybe lose a couple of bucks in that, well, maybe a lot more than a couple of bucks, but the U.S. comes in with the British, CIA coup, overthrows that government. The Shah comes back even more repressive than before, using U.S. weapons. In fact, Iran became the #1 purchaser of U.S. weapons and repressed all civil society. The only where that people could organize were within the mosques. And so when they're finally able to overthrow the Shah in 1979, who has the most power to take control then? It's the clerics. So let's trace that back and understand the responsibility we have. The 1979 Islamic Revolution comes to power. Of course, it's not only anti-Shah, but naturally, it is anti-American. And they take over the U.S. embassy, and the U.S. severs relations with Iran and imposes sanctions with Iran. And here we are, decades later, where there was a first chance with the Obama administration to actually start making a decent relationship with Iran. And we get the Iran nuclear deal, thanks not only to John Kerry and the Obama administration and the Iranians, but also to the UK, France, Germany, China, Russia. We get a nuclear deal that had the possibility of really moving to normalizing relations with Iran. And who didn't want that deal to happen? Israel. Who else didn't want that deal to happen? Saudi Arabia. And so Trump comes in, he sides with Israel and Saudi Arabia. I'm looking at you not because it's your fault. Israel and Saudi Arabia, and the chutzpah of Netanyahu to say to Iran that has how many nuclear weapons? Zero. And how many does Israel have? 200. We don't know. We know they have lots. We don't know because they've been lying since the 1960s about their nuclear policies, and they've never joined any international agreement around nuclear weapons. And Netanyahu has the chutzpah to come and tell the American people that we should be worried about Iran getting nuclear weapons. And we should be, because we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but we certainly don't want Israel or the United States or anyone in the world to have nuclear weapons. So I asked you to raise your hand if you were worried about a war with Iran, because that is where the U.S. policy is headed right now. And so if you look at the sanctions that have been tightened up since Trump took the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal, those are designed to make the people so miserable that they will rise up. The Iranian currency, the rial, has lost 60% of its value since last year. Imagine if the dollar had lost 60% of its value. And people are rising up. And let's face it, a lot of people don't like their government in Iran, just like a lot of us here don't like our government in the United States. So there are Iranian people that are out on the streets wanting to see a change in government. But they look around and they say, oh, let's see, if the U.S. came in and helped us overthrow this government, what would it look like? Well, they look at Iraq. They certainly don't want to look like that. They look at Libya. They don't want to look like that. They look at Syria. They don't want to look like that. They say maybe a better route is to allow us, the Iranian people, to change our own government. Don't you think that would be a better way to do things? And so that's where we stand right now, which is to stop what our government is doing, which is trying to create chaos inside Iran, trying to overthrow that government with no plan really in place about who would take over, except a crazy idea that the MEK, a terrorist group, which has zero base of support inside Iran because they sided with Iran's enemy Iraq during a bloody 8-year war, somehow that group would be able to take over. So there is really what many Iranians think is that what the U.S. wants is chaos. What Israel wants is chaos. What Saudi Arabia wants is chaos. Let Iranians just kill each other. Let there be internal strife over who would take over. Let the minority groups that the U.S. has been supporting rise up and demand independent states. Maybe that's what the U.S. policy is all about. Who knows? But what we know now is the Iranian people are suffering. These sanctions don't hurt governments. These sanctions hurt the Iranian people. And we really have to do something about it. So I want to just take my last minutes about what can we do about it. There is some momentum. Well, first of all, we are trying to organize a big delegation to go to Iran as a peace delegation from the United States to say we won't let our government take us to war. So raise your hand if you have any interest in joining a peace delegation. All right, look at this. Imagine what we could organize. So come up and sign up on the CODEPINK sign-up sheet outside to let us know you want more information about that delegation. We have somebody leaving next week for Iran to try to see, can we get the visas? Can we organize such a delegation? They are talking about wanting us to come by November 4th, which is when the next round of U.S. sanctions is supposed to be imposed. And those sanctions are supposed to cut off all of Iran's oil exports exports, which is where they get the vast majority of their money. So imagine what was going to happen come November 4th. Other things we can do, I know we're all sick and tired and disgusted by our Congress, but you know what? Those are the people that are supposed to represent us. The fact that we can't get more people in Congress to stand up for Palestinian rights is our fault. The fact that we continue to allow them to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia is our fault. It's because we don't do enough to demand that they change their policies. I have a lot of people coming up to me and saying, oh, Medea, we're so excited when we see CODEPINK getting arrested in those hearings in Congress. You know what? You too can get arrested in those hearings in Congress. And we need you to do that. If it's your first offense, and Ann can attest to this, her first offense, it was only $50, right? Gets a little harder as you do more and more. But, you know, for 50, when it was her first arrest, this was many arrests ago. But for those of you who have never been arrested in Congress, it is a badge of courage. We need you to come to Washington, D.C., go into the hearings, go into your lousy congressperson's office or your lousy senator's office and tell them you won't leave until you get a meeting with them or their chief of staff. And you know what? You usually get those meetings that you never get by calling on the phone and say, hello, I'd like a meeting. So anyway, please join us. We have an activist peace house in Washington, D.C. We can put you up there. We can show you how to do it. Ann will take you into the hearing herself. You can get arrested with Ann Wright. What better thing would there be? And the last... And their district offices. Thank you so much. How many of you have some kind of relationship, whether it's a good or bad one, with your congressperson? How many of you don't really have a relationship? Admit it. Come on, let's see the hands. All of you should have a relationship. They should know you, whether they like you or say, oh no, here she comes again. You should know your congresspeople. So thank you very much, Ellen. The district is really, really important. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the campaign that we have at CODEPINK, which is called Divest from the War Machine, and we're working very closely with Veterans for Peace and many other groups on this campaign. It is a campaign that tells people that the crux of all of this is the military, industrial, congressional, security, academic, you name it, complex that is strangling us, and that it's time we really get to the bottom of why we keep these continuous wars, and that is for profit. So we have a campaign, and I want to introduce you to Rita, who's live streaming right here, but she's at the CODEPINK table outside. She works on this Divest campaign and can work with you on your city, on your university, on your pension fund, on your own investments, whatever it is, and on your congressperson as well. Because part of this campaign is to say to our congresspeople, you know what, it is an absolute conflict of interest that you are giving money to the Pentagon that turns around and gives it to these weapons manufacturers or merchants of death, as the Pope calls them, and you're taking money from them for your elections. Even Bernie Sanders took $350,000 from the weapons industry. So part of this Divest campaign is say, we do not want anybody in Congress to take a penny from the merchants of death. So join our campaigns. Thank you for the work of Veterans for Peace. Let's get out there and say no more war. Thank you.